I worked double shifts, skipped my own dreams, and held his life together for 4 years so he could get his PhD. 11 months after he graduated, he married someone else. This is what nobody tells you about being the woman who builds a man's future. We met at 26. I know that sounds like a long time ago now, from the vantage point of 34, but at 26, I was the kind of person who still believed that the right timing and the right person were things that arrived together if you were paying attention. And Marcus felt like both of those things arriving at the same moment. He was finishing his first year of his PhD program. I was working at a law firm as an administrative assistant, taking night classes, figuring out my direction in the specific way that people in their mid-20s figure out direction, which is mostly by moving and correcting and moving again. I was not lost exactly. I just had not yet found the particular shape of what I was moving toward. We met at a party hosted by a mutual friend, and he was the kind of person who was immediately easy to talk to, which I now understand is a specific skill and not the same thing as being easy to know. He was funny and interested, and he asked questions, and he remembered the answers. He asked me what I wanted to do with my life, and he listened to my answer for longer than most people listen to answers to that question, which was not long, but was longer than usual. I called my friend Dana on the way home and said I had met someone. We started dating in October of that year. By January, I knew it was serious. The kind of serious that rearranges your future tense. The way you start using we instead of I when you talk about what comes next. By spring, I had met his parents and he had met mine, and the thing between us had become the central organizing fact of my life. I want to be clear that in the beginning, the support was mutual. This matters to me because I am not interested in painting a portrait of myself as a woman who gave everything and received nothing, because that would not be accurate for the first year. Marcus was attentive and present, and he showed up for me in the ways that felt significant at 26. The birthday surprises and the listening and the particular way he had of making me feel like my existence was something he was glad about. The imbalance did not arrive all at once. It arrived the way most imbalances arrive in relationships, incrementally, one small adjustment at a time, each one reasonable in isolation, each one part of a cumulative shift that I did not notice until the shift was complete. His second year of the PhD program was harder than the first. This is normal. The coursework deepens and the research demands increase, and the mental load of a doctoral program in a hard science is not something I had fully understood before I was inside it alongside him. He came home depleted in ways that were genuine. He needed more than he had needed in the first year. I gave more because I loved him, and because I could see clearly that he was struggling, and because giving more to someone you love when they are struggling is what you do. The problem was that more never went back to where it had been. The baseline kept shifting. By his third year, I was paying 60% of our rent. He had a stipend from the university, but it was modest and the program was consuming, and I told him genuinely and without resentment that I could carry more right now and he should focus on his work. I meant it. I want to be clear that I meant it. I picked up a second job bartending on weekend nights. I had bartended in college, and I was good at it, and the money was real money. Not supplemental pocket money, but actual contribution to our actual life. I worked Friday and Saturday nights and came home at 2 in the morning and was up by 7 for my weekday job, and I told myself this was temporary. That we were in a specific chapter that would end when he graduated, and then the load would equalize, and we would build together from a more level place. I told myself that for 2 more years. What I did not tell myself, what I was not yet equipped to see, was that Marcus had stopped asking how I was in any real way sometime in his third year. Not stopped asking the words. He still said, "How was your day?" and he still listened to the first few sentences of the answer, but the quality of the listening had changed. The attention was partial, always partially somewhere else. On his research, on his committee, on the particular consuming world of his work. I had become, in some way I did not yet have language for, a supporting structure rather than a person he was in relationship with. I did not name this at the time. I noticed it the way you notice a slight change in the temperature of a room, a feeling that something is different without being able to point to what changed and when. By his 4th year, I had deferred my paralegal certification twice. The first time because the timing had genuinely been bad, a hard month for both of us, a thing that needed handling. The second time because he had a major milestone coming up and the household needed managing, and I did not feel I had the bandwidth for both. My goals had become something I was always about to get to. Always just after this thing that needed handling first. His graduation was in May. I took a half day from work to be there. I stood behind the camera and I took the photo of him and his family, and I was happy for him, genuinely. The way you are happy when someone you love achieves something real. I drove home from the graduation and I made a reservation at his favorite restaurant for a celebration dinner that evening. I had bought a card. I had written something real in it. Something about what the 4 years had meant and how proud I was and how excited I was for what came next. He read the card at the restaurant and he smiled and he said thank you. He did not say anything about what came next for us. 3 weeks later, he said he needed to talk to me. That conversation was not the beginning of the end. I understand now that it was simply the end, and that what I had thought was the beginning of the end had actually begun much earlier. In a small shift I had not caught. in a room whose temperature had been changing for years while I was too busy keeping the heat on to notice. 3 weeks after his graduation, sitting across from me at our kitchen table, Marcus ended our relationship. He was kind about it. He said things that were true and things that were not true and things he believed were true that I now understand were simply the story he needed to tell himself. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said he felt like he had grown in a different direction. He said he cared about me deeply and always would. He did not say that the woman he had been growing toward was already waiting. I found that out later from a source I had not expected, and what I found out reframed the entire 4 years in a way that took my breath. I need to tell you about Dana. Dana had been my best friend since we were 22. The kind of friendship that has survived moves and breakups and the ordinary erosions of adult life. She knew Marcus almost as well as I did. She had been at birthday dinners and holiday gatherings and the kinds of casual evenings that accumulate into a shared history. She was, in the full sense of the word, inside my life. 2 months after Marcus and I broke up, Dana called me on a Tuesday evening and said she needed to tell me something. Her voice had the specific quality of a person who has been carrying information that belongs to someone else and has finally decided they cannot carry it anymore. I said, "Tell me." She said, "I saw Marcus in March. At a conference? The biochemistry one upstate." I said, "Okay." She said, "He was with someone. A woman. They were not acting like colleagues." March. 2 months before his graduation. 2 months before he sat across our kitchen table and told me he had grown in a different direction. I sat very still on my couch with the phone against my ear. Dana said, "I did not know what to do with it." I told myself maybe I had read it wrong. I did not want to tell you something that would hurt you if I was not sure. And then he broke up with you and I still told myself maybe it was nothing. I said, "But," she said, "But he is engaged, Vivian. It has been 4 months since you broke up and he is engaged. And the woman he is engaged to is the woman I saw him with in March. 4 months. He had been engaged for 4 months. We had been broken up for 4 months. The math was so clean it was almost architectural." I asked Dana to describe her. She did. I sat and listened, and I thought about a man who had told me he had been doing a lot of thinking. I thought about thinking and what it meant, and what kind of thinking could coexist with a woman at a conference in March and a breakup in June and an engagement in October. After I hung up with Dana, I sat in my apartment for a very long time. I want to be honest about what I felt because I think honesty in this specific moment is important. I was not just heartbroken. I was something else underneath the heartbreak, something that took me weeks to find the right word for. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed in the deep particular way that comes from understanding that while you were operating in good faith, someone else was operating on a different set of terms entirely. That while I was working double shifts and deferring my certification and making restaurant reservations for celebration dinners and writing something real in a card, he had already been somewhere else. That I had been performing a role in a story whose ending I did not know and he did. The starter wife. I had seen the phrase on Reddit before, the woman who sacrifices while her partner develops and then gets discarded once the development is complete. Once he has become the version of himself he was working toward, and that version no longer needs the scaffolding. I had read those posts with a kind of distant sympathy, and I had not applied them to myself because I was not that woman. Except I was that woman. I called in sick to work the next day. I sat on my couch and I let myself feel the full shape of it for one day. The grief, and the anger, and the embarrassment, and the specific exhaustion of a woman who has been carrying more than her share for 4 years, and has now discovered that the carrying was not an investment in a shared future, but a subsidy for someone else's. Then I got up and I made coffee and I started thinking about what I had actually lost and what I had and where I was going to go from here. What I had lost was the future I had imagined. What I had was a paralegal certification I had deferred twice, and a career I had kept smaller than it should have been, and a very clear understanding of what I was worth and what I had given and the gap between those two things. What I was going to do with that gap was the question. I called my mother that evening. My mother is the kind of woman who does not waste time on rage that is not useful, but has a very precise relationship with accountability, her own and other people's. I told her everything: the breakup, Dana's call, the conference in March, the engagement in 4 months. There was a silence on her end. Then she said, "Vivian, what do you need right now?" I said, "I need to understand how I did not see this." She said, "You saw what he showed you. That is not a failure of perception. That is a failure of his honesty." I said, "I gave 4 years to this." She said, "I know. And you are going to get them back differently than you put them in. But you are going to get them back." I did not fully believe her that night. I believed her more the following month when I finally did something I had been putting off for 2 years. I enrolled in the paralegal certification program. Not for him, not in spite of him. For the simple reason that it was the thing I had wanted and kept setting aside, and setting it aside had not protected me from anything, had not bought me anything, had simply delayed the thing I wanted while funding the thing he wanted. I was not going to delay it anymore. 3 months into the program, I got a notification on Instagram. Marcus and his fiancée had set a wedding date. The engagement announcement had gathered 247 likes. There were photos of them together. Happy photos, the kind that have good light and genuine smiles. I looked at the photos for a moment. Then I put my phone face down and went back to my coursework. But the following week something happened that I had not seen coming, and that required me to make a decision about what kind of woman I was going to be in the aftermath of all of this. Her name was Sophie. She was 31, a postdoctoral researcher, the kind of woman who had a clean professional headshot on her university page and publications listed, and a bio that moved through her accomplishments with the specific confidence of someone who had always known what they were for. She sent me a message on a Thursday evening in January, 9 months after Marcus and I had broken up, 2 months after Dana had told me about the conference, 6 weeks after I had enrolled in my certification program and started the long work of rebuilding the shape of my life. The message was not hostile. That was the first thing I noticed. I had expected hostility or defensiveness or the particular patronizing warmth of a woman who has what you had and knows it. The message was none of those things. It was careful. It was direct. It said, "I know this is strange and I understand if you do not want to respond. I have been trying to decide whether to reach out for a long time. I think you deserve to know some things and I think I need to say them." I read it twice. Then I sat with it for 2 days before I responded. I said, "I am listening." She called me on a Saturday morning. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee, and I listened to the voice of the woman who was going to marry the man I had spent 4 years building toward a future, and I tried to hold whatever I was feeling loosely enough to hear what she was saying. She said she had known about me, not the way I had feared, not the full cynical version where she had known everything and participated in the deception from the beginning. She had known Marcus was in a long-term relationship. He had told her, when things between them became something he could not describe as just colleagues, that his relationship was effectively over, that it had been over for a long time, that he was with someone out of habit and history and did not know how to end it. Out of habit and history. I thought about that phrase for a long time after the call. I thought about the card I had written for his graduation and the reservation at his favorite restaurant and 2 jobs and deferred certifications and 3 years of carrying more than my share. Out of habit and history. Sophie said she had not known the full picture until after they were engaged, when details had come out in pieces, when she had started understanding the timeline and what it meant. She said she had felt sick when she understood the full shape of it. She said, "I am not asking for your forgiveness. I am not asking for anything. I just think someone should say to you directly that what happened was not fair to you, and that the version of it he told was not honest." I said, "What version did he tell?" She said he had described our relationship as something that had run its natural course, that we had grown apart, that by the end we were more roommates than partners, and it had been mutual. Mutual. I thought about mutual. I thought about the phone call in October, 8 months after the graduation, where he told me he was engaged and his voice had a quality I had not heard before. A lightness. The voice of a man who had arrived somewhere he wanted to be. I had cried after that call in a way I had not cried since the breakup itself. That was not mutual. I said, "Sophie, why are you telling me this?" She said, "Because I would want to know. If I were you, I would want to know that I had not imagined it. That the investment was real even if the return was not." I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at my coffee and I thought about a woman I had never met who had called me on a Saturday morning to tell me that I had not imagined it. I said, "Are you still marrying him?" A pause. She said, "Yes." I said, "Okay." She said, "I know how that sounds." I said, "It sounds like a decision you have made." She said, "I love him. That is not nothing even when everything else is complicated." I said, "No, it is not nothing." We talked for 40 more minutes. Not about Marcus specifically, not about the relationship or the engagement or the things that separated our positions. We talked the way women talk, when they have found themselves in an absurd situation together, and absurdity sometimes makes people honest. She was smart. She was genuinely remorseful about her part in it. She was also clearly in the way that people are when they have decided. After we hung up, I sat for a long time. I felt something I had not expected to feel, which was a complicated gratitude, not for the situation, not for any of what had happened, but for the call itself, for being told by someone in a position to tell me that I had not imagined the investment and the investment had been real. Sometimes that is what you need more than justice. You need someone to confirm that what you experienced was true. I opened my laptop and I went back to my coursework and I studied for 3 hours straight, the focused kind of studying that comes when something has been resolved in you that was previously taking up mental space. My mother called that evening. I told her about Sophie's call. She listened. Then she said, "What do you feel?" I said, "It's strangely okay." She said, "Good." I said, "Not because it was okay. Because I am done letting it take things from me." She said, "That is the right place to be." It was the right place to be. And from that place, I started doing something I had not done in 4 years. Something small and daily that turned out to be the most significant thing I did in the entire year that followed. The first thing I did differently was stop explaining myself. I do not mean that dramatically. I mean the specific habit I had developed over 4 years of justifying my choices in terms of what they meant for Marcus. The 2 jobs described as supporting us through a hard chapter, the deferred certification described as timing, the scaled-back ambitions described as being realistic about bandwidth. I had become fluent in a language that framed my sacrifices as joint decisions and my contributions as simply the way things were. I stopped speaking that language, not to anyone specific, just internally, in the way I talked to myself about my own history. I started calling things what they were. I worked 2 jobs for 2 years to cover rent while he completed his degree. I deferred my certification twice so the household had what it needed. I organized my ambitions around the shape of his. These were not neutral choices that had simply accumulated. They were choices I had made on behalf of a shared future that had not turned out to be shared. Naming them accurately was the beginning of something. The paralegal program was harder than I had expected and exactly as satisfying as I had hoped. I was good at it in a way that surprised me only because I had told myself for so long, in the language of that old framing, that I was not ready, that the timing was not right, that I needed more bandwidth. What I actually needed was to stop giving my bandwidth to someone else and have some for myself. I finished the first module with the highest mark in my cohort. I do not say this to be impressive. I say it because the mark told me something I had stopped believing, which was that I was capable of excellent things when I was not spending my excellence on someone else's goals. My supervisor at the firm, a woman named Helene who had been watching me do administrative work for 4 years with the particular patience of someone waiting for a person to catch up to their own potential, called me into her office in March and asked if I was ready for more responsibility. I said yes. She moved me to a paralegal role on a transitional basis. The salary was not the full paralegal salary yet. That would come when I completed the certification, but it was more than I had been making, and it was work that used me in a fuller way. And I drove home from that conversation and sat in my car and thought about 4 years of deferred things and what they would have become if I had pursued them. I did not let myself stay in that thought too long. The past was not something I could recover directly. What I could do was move from where I was. I moved my apartment. Not far, just to a different neighborhood. A place that did not have the specific memory of him in its walls. A place that was only mine, decorated only for me, arranged according to my preferences with no negotiation. I bought a plant and then 4 more plants because I had always wanted plants and Marcus had said he found them messy. I painted the bathroom a deep green because I had always wanted a deep green bathroom and had lived for 3 years in a beige one. These sound like small things. The plants and the paint. They were not small. They were the accumulation of preferences I had put on hold, the texture of a life organized around my own choices rather than someone else's comfort. Denise, my friend from work, said to me one Friday evening over wine, "You seem different." I said, "Different how?" She said, "Like you are taking up more space." I thought about that. Taking up more space. I had spent 4 years making myself small enough to fit into the life of a man who was growing. I was done being small. In June, almost exactly a year after Marcus's graduation, I received my paralegal certification. There was no ceremony, just a document in my email, and then a physical copy in the mail. And I held the physical copy in my apartment surrounded by my plants. And I thought about the 2 times I had deferred this and what those deferrals had cost, and what the document in my hands now represented. It represented mine. This was mine. It had not been funded by anyone else's support, or enabled by anyone else's belief in me, or made possible by a partner who rearranged his life to make room for it. I had done this on my own, alongside a full-time job in the year after a relationship had ended in a way that had required me to rebuild from the ground up. I went out to dinner alone that evening, at a restaurant I had chosen, and I ordered what I wanted, and I sat at a table for one, without the vague self-consciousness that used to accompany being alone in public, and I thought, this is a life. This is actually a life. What I had not expected was a call 3 weeks later. Not from Marcus, not from Sophie, not from anyone connected to that chapter. From a number I did not recognize. When I answered, the voice on the other end was familiar in a way that took me a moment to place. And when I placed it, I understood that the chapter I had thought was closed was about to ask me one more question before it let me go. It was Marcus's mother. Her name was Evelyn, and she had always been warm with me, genuinely so. The kind of warmth that did not feel like performance. She had invited me to family dinners and asked real questions about my work, and remembered small details I had mentioned in passing in the way that attentive people do. I had liked her. I had, in the way that you do when you are in a long relationship, started to think of her as something adjacent to family. She said she was sorry for calling out of nowhere. She said she had gotten my number from an old message thread on Marcus's phone when they had been at her house for something. She did not explain the specifics, and I did not ask. She said she had been thinking about calling for a long time and had kept deciding against it and then kept deciding to do it anyway. I said, "What did you want to say?" She said, "I wanted to say that I know what you gave during those 4 years. I saw it. I was at that house enough times to see what the actual arrangement was. And I want you to know that I said something to Marcus about it. More than once. I sat with that." She said he did not listen. Or he listened and he did not change. I am not excusing him. I am just telling you that it was not invisible. Not to me. I said, "Thank you for saying that." She said, "I also want to say I am sorry for the way it ended, for the timeline of it, for all of it. I said, "You do not need to apologize for what he did." She said, "I know. I am apologizing anyway because someone should and he has not." I thought about that. Someone should and he has not. A mother apologizing for her son because the apology existed and needed to go somewhere, and she was the one willing to carry it. I asked her because I needed to ask someone who had been close enough to see it. I asked her when she thought it had shifted. Not when he had met Sophie, I knew that part. But when the relationship with me had become something he was in rather than something he was building. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think it shifted when he stopped being afraid." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "When he came into the program, he was uncertain. He was not sure he could do it. You believed in him when he did not believe in himself, and that mattered enormously to him. But when he started succeeding, when he started to feel certain, he needed the belief less. And when you stopped being necessary for that, I think he stopped seeing you as clearly." I sat with that for a long time after the call ended. When he stopped being afraid. When he stopped needing me to hold the belief for him. When I had served the purpose I had unknowingly been serving and the purpose was complete. I was not angry at Evelyn. I was grateful for her honesty in the way I had been grateful for Sophie's. A gratitude that had nothing to do with the information being comfortable and everything to do with it being true. I thought about what she had described and I thought about my own part in it. Not in a self-blaming way. I had done enough of that already and it had not been useful. But in a clear-eyed way. I had organized myself around being necessary. Around being the stable ground. Around holding the belief and managing the household and keeping the heat on. And I had done this so thoroughly and so well that I had made myself into a function rather than a person in the relationship, the way the best caregivers sometimes do, the way the most capable supporters sometimes do, becoming so good at the support that the person they are supporting stops seeing the human underneath it. I had contributed to my own invisibility. Not because I was wrong to support him. Support in a relationship is not wrong. But because I had made the support so complete and so seamless that there was no friction left, no place where my own needs and desires and ambitions pushed back against his and created the kind of productive resistance that keeps two people in genuine relation to each other. I had smoothed everything out and disappeared into the smoothness. I was not going to do that again. Not because I had learned not to love people, but because I had learned that love without self is not sustainable, that you cannot pour from a container you have emptied, and that the most loving thing you can do in a relationship is remain a full person inside it. Marcus got married in September. Dana sent me a screenshot of the wedding announcement, not to be unkind, but because she knew I would rather see it from her than stumble on it. I looked at it for a moment. They looked happy in the way that people look happy when they are at the beginning of something, and the beginning still has all its shine. I put the phone down. I had a study group that evening for an advanced contracts course I had enrolled in, the next step in my professional development, and I went to it and I sat around a table with 4 other people who were also building something. And we worked through the material together, and I drove home after with my mind full of cases and precedents, and the specific satisfaction of being someone who is engaged in the work of becoming. What I did not know was that the following week I would have a conversation that would be the last piece of this particular chapter, the thing that closed it properly, and it would come from the most unexpected direction of all. My father called me on a Sunday in October. My father is a man of few words and considered timing. He does not call without a reason, and when he calls, he says the thing he called to say without a lot of preamble. I had always respected this about him even when I was young, and the directness felt startling. He said, "Your mother told me the full story, the 4 years and how it ended and what you have been doing since." I said, "Okay." He said, "I want to ask you something." I said, "Go ahead." He said, "Are you angry?" I thought about it honestly, not the performed answer, the actual one. I said, "Yes." Not all the time, but yes. He said, "Good. You should be." What happened was not fair, and anger at unfairness is accurate. I am not worried about the anger. I said, "What are you worried about?" He said, "I am worried about the lesson you might take from it. There is a version of this where you decide not to give yourself fully to anything again, not to a person, and not to a goal. Because giving fully cost you, and the cost was not returned fairly. I want to know if you are taking that lesson." I sat with that question. It was the most precise question anyone had asked me in the entire year that had followed Marcus, and I had not seen it coming from that direction. I said, "I do not think I am taking that lesson." He said, "What lesson are you taking?" I said that I had a giving problem. Not the giving itself, the giving was not the problem. The problem was who I was giving to and what I was giving up to do it. I gave to someone who was not giving back at the same depth. I gave up things that were mine to give. The lesson is not to stop giving. The lesson is to give to things that are actually mine. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That is the right lesson." We talked for another 20 minutes, which for my father was a long call. He asked about the certification and the new role at the firm and the apartment. I told him about all of it. He listened with the specific quality of attention he had, thorough and unhurried. Before we hung up, he said, "Vivian, you are 34 years old. You have a career that is going in the right direction, and a brain that works, and 4 years of experience managing something hard. None of that is wasted. It is all in you. It goes where you go." I said, "I know." He said, "I do not think you fully know yet, but you will." I think about that call sometimes when I am in the middle of something at work, something that requires the specific combination of patience and precision and capacity to hold a complicated situation together that I developed, at least in part, over 4 years of holding a complicated situation together. My father was right that it goes where you go. Skills do not know how they were built. They just are. I am 34 now. I am a paralegal at a firm I am building a real career at. I live in an apartment with 5 plants and a deep green bathroom and a kitchen table that has never had anyone's research spread across it in a way that meant I could not use it. Go to dinner with Denise, and I call Dana, and I talk to my parents on Sundays. I am not in a relationship. I have been on dates, a few. The careful, tentative kind that feel like trying on clothes in a store. Useful information without commitment. I am not opposed to a relationship. I am just no longer in a hurry. I am no longer organizing my present around what I imagine a future might need from me. I think about Sophie sometimes. I wonder how it is going. I hope it is going well, not because I am a saint, I am not a saint, but because the alternative, hoping it fails, would require me to keep my attention on something that is not mine anymore, and I am done keeping my attention there. Marcus exists somewhere in the city with his PhD and his publications and his wife and his future. The future I helped fund is now being lived. I have made my peace with that, not because it was fair, but because the unfairness of it does not take anything from me unless I let it. What I have instead is this: my own future, unfunded by anyone's double shifts, undeferred for anyone's timeline, built in the direction I chose and at the pace I set. It is smaller right now than the future I had imagined when I was 26 and in love and believed that investment and return were proportional. But it is mine. Every square inch of it is mine. I took the photo at his graduation. I am not in it. I have thought about that more than once this year, and what I have come to understand is that not being in the photo was not the problem. The problem was that I had handed him the camera for so long that I had forgotten it was mine. I have it back now. I am pointing it at something worth photographing.
Hope you guys enjoy the story. Tell in comments your opinion.